Advent, people to testify about waiting for the light to shine. And this morning, we have the great privilege of listening to our friend, Jen Kalnicki. Please come forward, my love.
Good morning. Please forgive my voice. I lost it on Thursday, and I haven't quite found it yet. I'm just going to get comfortable here. So I have been given the opportunity to experience beautiful tragedies multiple times in my life. Abuse at the hands of trusted adults. Domestic violence at the hands of a man who promised to love me. Cancer's indiscriminate reach, changing my perfectly laid out plans for life. Death, mental illness, divorce, poverty, bullying, violence. We all have our own lists, right? It was the dead of winter. I was driving around at 2 in the morning with nowhere to go, nowhere I felt safe. I had just broken free from an abusive marriage, and it had been a few weeks since the staged break-in. I was convinced that my ex-husband was watching my house, planning his next move while watching mine. My trunk was still full of hastily tossed belongings, so I jumped into my little car to hopefully find some solace in the company of someone else's living room. Every phone call went to voicemail. Every text went unanswered. I was terrified, and I was utterly alone. I drove in ever-widening circles until I came upon a hotel set back in a business park. It was well lit and even had a police car circling the parking lot. I went in, I booked a room under a fake name. I paid cash. And I went in through a back door. Once I settled into the massive king-size bed, the tears came. Each tear represented the death of every hope and expectation I had for my marriage. They represented the anguish and the hate and the manipulation I had experienced for the previous 5 years. They represented the self-loathing I had for myself for being stupid enough to fall into his trap time and time and time again. The enormity of my despair drove me to my knees. It was there that clarity and light entered. As I examined my deepest, darkest thoughts, I was able to see and to seek God. My tears became a balm. With each drop, my resolve to never depend on another person to make me feel whole again became more resolute. I knew then that I was not, and I had never been alone. The sun began to rise as my eyes began to dry, and I slept deeply in the warmth of the rays for the first time in years. It was the dead of winter. It was around 2 in the morning. A couple of nights after my first round of chemo, and I was wrapped up in a donated blanket with a tag that told me to imagine the blanket as its donor's arms holding me tight. It had been over 12 years since that night when, in my darkness, God had appeared. The whole house was quiet. I was wretchedly sick. Every centimeter of my body was in pain. Again, I felt terrified and alone. As my tears began, I cried for the pain. I cried for the fear. I cried for the loss of myself and my imagined future. I cried for my babies and the journey we were forced to begin. I cried for Mark and my mom and my mother-in-law. The enormity of my despair drove me to my knees. And it was in the journey that clarity and light appeared. That night, I finally fell into a fitful sleep. Throughout the coming months, I had many, many opportunities to examine my deepest, darkest thoughts. This time, though, I didn't have to seek God. God was there in the meal train, in the unexpected gifts, in the financial support, in this congregation, in the scandalous generosity. I felt God in the words of love and encouragement from friends and family and strangers. I saw God in the love army that was sent, who filled any and every need. I was never alone, and neither are you. This testimony is not about becoming an Instagram meme about positivity. Let's be real, most of that stuff is just curated content to make believe that we are all enlightened. This testimony is about finding the beauty within the tragedy. It's about seeking the light. It's about seeking God when it seems like there is no light to be found. It's about taking hold of the opportunity to examine our deepest, darkest parts. It's about changing the narrative from why is this happening to me to what can I learn from this? If you are in darkness, if you are in your darkness, it's about knowing that you're not alone. These tragic opportunities, the hardest experiences of our lives, are our own personal times of Advent. In order to understand light's power, one has to know darkness.
Preach.
And in order to understand the enormity of love's grace, well, you get the idea.